Uh,
Yep, I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
yeah, now we got you, sure.
Wonderful. Okay. Now, my colleague is there in the room with you, Dr. Gus Bassani, and we're both with the same company, so if it's okay with you, would it be all right for him to kind of start off with the introduction?
Oh, sure, please.
Hey, thank you. Thank you. My name is Gus Bassani, and I serve as Chief Scientific Officer for PCCA in Houston, Texas. As AJ indicated, he's got a slide deck that he's going to present to you, but I had a few opening comments that I wanted to share with you guys. In addition to my responsibilities at PCCA, you may remember from earlier this morning, Sarah Rothman at FDA mentioned the USP, which is the United States Pharmacopoeia. They write the standards for compounding, principally Chapter 795, which is non-sterile compounding, and Chapter 797, which is sterile compounding. They've done a lot of very important work over the last couple of years, and I've been privileged to serve on that committee as well as on their compounding expert committee. Real briefly, PCCA in the simplest of terms is a supplier. We are a supplier of active pharmaceutical ingredients, excipients, and base products to compounding pharmacies. We are registered with the FDA as a repackager, wholesaler, and in addition to that activity, we provide education and are a technical resource to pharmacies that specialize in compounding. There was a lot of questions, I think, earlier around the supply chain side of things and what assurances are there that the ingredients being used in compounding are appropriate. I think it's important to note that in Section 503A of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, that it does require that bulk drug substances, or APIs, are manufactured by FDA-registered facilities. And as PCCA, we only import APIs that are, or bring them in domestically, but these days so many of these things are made overseas, but are made in FDA-registered facilities. Part of our criteria internally is registration is one thing, but being inspected recently is also very important. So the fact that they've been inspected in the last 3 years is an important aspect or criteria that we use in vetting manufacturers of APIs. So we have an in-depth vetting process around that, and we do quarantine every lot of chemical that comes in the door, and our quality control department does the appropriate testing, identification testing, and other tests to verify that it is what it's supposed to be. And 503A and 503B require that bulk drug substance comes from FDA-registered facility to be CGMP and also be accompanied by a certificate of analysis. Every lot must be accompanied by a certificate of analysis. I think it was an important note, too, that many of the manufacturers of the bulk drug substances that we sell also have drug master files on file with the FDA, which is an extra quality assurance step. It just shows that the manufacturer of that particular API is being much more transparent with the agency and may deem or may have aspirations of that API being used in a finished product. Part of the registration or part of the inspection requirements that we have internally within the last 3 years, they have to be inspected by the FDA or another recognized authority such as Health Canada, the EU, or the PICS, or members of the PICS, and that's the Pharmaceutical Inspection Cooperation Scheme, which was established in 1995. The other piece of the supply chain that's important is, everything that's received is tested, and then once it's repackaged, it's tested again, and then we have random audits throughout our facility to make sure that the right chemical gets in the right jar. So those are just a couple little points I wanted to make around the supply chain and how important that is for the quality of the end preparations being prepared in the field. So over the last 38 years that we've been in existence, we've come to recognize that there is a great need at times for personalization, a great need for an extemporaneous formulation to be made. And I think that was highlighted in some of the clinical presentations earlier. We have developed internally a great understanding of the formulation needs in the marketplace and the aspects of risk associated with preparing compounded preparations. And so we've spent a great deal of time developing technical resources for pharmacies to help mitigate some of that risk, and which is why we have a formulation development team and an R&D team that does testing on the physicochemical aspects of formulations. So what do I mean by that? I mean, you know, if you follow a particular formula via the procedures that are specified in the formulation, does it test out? I mean, can you make a uniform preparation that is stable over the course of its beyond use state? We utilize beyond use state testing, which leverages stability indicating analytical methods, and we use bracketed ranges. So in the case of bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, I think earlier you got the feel that there is a lot of personalization needed in this particular arena. So what happens if I have a 100 milligram dose of progesterone versus a 20 milligram dose of progesterone, and how do I know those formulations are stable? Well, we can do bracketed studies, so low concentrations and high concentrations, everything else remains the same, and you can utilize the beyond use state information for that study for individual doses that fall in between that bracket. It's commonly utilized in industry as well. And it's not just that. It's content uniformity. It's homogeneity, and also if it's an aqueous containing preparation, we've devoted resources towards doing USP 51 testing, which measures the efficacy of the preservatives that are in that particular preparation. We oftentimes forget about the impact of microbiology in all these preparations if it's a water-containing system. So this is important knowledge from a quality perspective for pharmacies to be able to have at their fingertips in order to make high-quality preparations. The last thing I wanted to mention before turning it over to AJ is there was also discussion around pharmacokinetics, and these are great questions. You know, some of the things that we've done on the formulation side is we've evaluated using Franz diffusion cell testing in human skin, in triplicate typically, in human cadaver skin, the ability of these formulations to deliver particular actives into and through human skin. Now, granted, these are in vitro methods. They're not nearly as valuable as an in vivo pharmacokinetic study. However, it does speak to the viability of a particular preparation to deliver a drug into and through human skin. It also speaks to the ability of the preparation for the ability of the embedded hormone in that preparation to partition out of the formulation and into the skin. So these are valuable tools that from a technical perspective that pharmacies can leverage and utilize. With that, I just wanted to turn it over now to AJ Day to dive into some of the other details. AJ?
Thank you, Gus. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. Okay, so with that introduction of who PCCA is and kind of our role in the marketplace, I wanted to take the opportunity to go through a little bit of the background and our role in the marketplace of BHRT, as well as compounding generally, and as well as address some further discussion topics that did come up during the previous meeting in March of this committee. So the first topic that comes up is, why do we even need to compound hormonal therapy? We've seen numerous times the variety of dosage forms and various drugs that have been approved by the FDA that contain estradiol USP or testosterone USP. And so what is that? What is the need? And as mentioned previously, this has been something that's around for decades. It's not a new creation. Really, the WHI publication did stimulate a lot of interest in having something that was an alternative to some of the BHRT products that were already on the market, and part of that is because of the nature of the medications that were available in FDA-approved formats. The knowledge of utilizing synthetics or conjugated estrogens as opposed to individually defined estrogens that were not synthetic, that were more structurally similar to what was in the body, was something that was more accessible through compounding pharmacies than it was through traditional mechanisms of conventionally manufactured products. And then we know that structure determines function. We see that there are seemingly minor variations in the structure between testosterone and progesterone, or estradiol and testosterone, but those minor differences make a significant impact on clinical value and clinical utility. And then when we look at the significant structural differences that you get when you create the esterized form of medroxyprogesterone acetate compared to progesterone USP, it is understandable why the risks associated with one as well as the benefits associated with one may not be 100% translatable to the other. There are a variety of doses, dosage forms, and different forms of the hormones, the natural bioidentical hormones, right? So bioidentical, has been stated previously, doesn't necessarily have a medical term. It has been more utilized to help people understand that we're talking about medications or API, active pharmaceutical ingredients, that are identical in structure to those that are naturally occurring, that are endogenous to our patients, to the human form. And they're ubiquitous in a lot of different FDA-approved products. So the reason that we're looking at bioidenticals is because the FDA-approved products, they do take care of the vast majority of the population. When we look at the process of seeking drug approval, we're looking to get a return on that investment to take care of the patients, but it's an expensive process. And so we're really looking at processes that can get us the return by taking care of the most possible patients. And that means that there are patients who fall outside of the acceptable range of those FDA-approved products. So there are patients who simply don't fit the mold of the mass-manufactured products, and therefore they need an alternative. And that's the existence of compound. That's why compounded HRT exists. So that small percentage of the population that doesn't fit the mold is really who we're talking about. And we heard earlier this morning the mention of the scope, the number of patients, the percentages, and that it's not necessarily a cottage industry. The best estimates of compounded prescriptions in the United States is between 1 and 5% of total prescriptions filled in the United States. And only a portion of that is going to be related to hormonal therapy, let alone bioidentical compounded hormonal therapy. So we are still looking at relatively small patient populations when we compare to the FDA-approved products. And all of the FDA-approved products that contain testosterone as well as estradiol are within the top 200 most prescribed medications in the United States year over year over year. The reason that we're looking at these specialized patient populations is because of patient compliance issues is really a very common factor. We heard a presentation earlier this morning talking about some patients prefer a gel, some patients don't. It's a tactile issue for many. The way it dries, the way it gives a sticky feeling on the skin, the risk of transference to another patient, the concentration and therefore the volume of medication that has to be applied to the patient, as well as dosage form acceptance. Some people find a particular dosage form to just be unpalatable, whether that has to do with an actual taste component or physically unpalatable. And convenience. Ultimately, we need to encourage our patients to be compliant with their medications. If they're not compliant, we're not really doing any good. They're not taking the medication as prescribed where it's going to actually benefit their outcome. Of course, the other component, which we heard also presentations this morning, has to do with the actual dosing itself. We want to adjust dosing to optimize clinical outcomes while minimizing adverse reactions. And then, of course, we have the intolerance to excipients. We talked about allergens and similar types of sensitivities. Now, this is a slide from the March meeting with Dr. Yüksel, and she presented some information about various studies and surveys that were published in peer-reviewed literature. And they talk about the most significant appeal was not the actual compounded BHRT or compounded bioidentical hormone therapy itself, but with the clinical care associated with it. I think that's an important component. I know that when we try to design clinical trials, we want to minimize the outside influencers. We want to focus on just the intervention at hand. However, if the patient is not comfortable with the medication, if the patient in the real world is not going to feel comfortable with the practitioner who is walking them through and caring for them on a continual basis, then ultimately that therapy is less likely to succeed. And that's why in all forms of medical training, whether it's pharmacy, nursing, or medical practice, medical school, the level of clinical care, bedside manner of patient interaction is emphasized. And that is very important to our patients receiving success in their therapies, whatever that therapy may be. We know that there are a lot of different corporate emphasis in the pharmacy world to look at patient compliance and patient engagement. So this slide is not specific to HRT. This is really more about seeking ways to engage our patients and making sure that we're maximizing the likelihood of patient compliance with the medication regimen. Again, from that March 5th meeting, there was another presentation from Dr. McPherson, and in his survey, they looked at clinical outcomes and patient satisfaction for patients who were receiving traditional hormone therapy versus compounded therapy, and you can see that the data from their survey showed very high rates of satisfaction for both clinical outcomes as well as patient satisfaction overall with their experience with the compounded therapy. Again, from that same presentation, they had an open-ended question about why did you and your physician decide to use this compounded medicine, and this was free form, a text write-in, and he noted that 14% of the respondents preferred the compounded BHRT because the dose was individualized to them. And in the discussion with the committee, he mentioned specifically that the dose was most commonly lower than what was available in commercially available drug products. I don't have more data than that. This is from the survey that he presented. And I did note that surveys have a variety of weaknesses inherent to their design. Part of that is who's going to respond to the survey and the number of responses that you get, and I have that notification here on the slide as well. Going back to something that Dr. Bassani mentioned just a moment ago, there have been a lot of questions in the previous meeting about how are compounds prepared, how are the formulations designed, the level of risk associated to the compounding personnel as they're putting all of these different ingredients together, the safety and quality control components. And I do have these videos here, and I don't want to take up too much time here in this introductory section, but if it's something that the committee wants to discuss or look at further during the Q&A time, I'll be happy to come back and show these videos for all of you to kind of see. Compounding is not manufacturing. So when we talk about CGMP and we talk about some of the other quality requirements, there are separate quality requirements related to the practice and art and science of compounding. USP Chapter 795 is the chapter setting the standards for compounding non-sterile preparations. 797 is related to compounding sterile preparations. State boards of pharmacy have primary oversight over state licensed pharmacies, as all state licensed professions and medical professions are, typically overseen on the state level. USP chapters are not universally adopted by state boards. We do see quite a few. The majority of states do tend to adopt the standards from 795 and or 797. It's not always by direct reference. Oftentimes they copy and paste into their own regulations, and part of that has to do with the structure and the requirements that the state legislature puts forth for the Board of Pharmacy and other medical boards. But those standards do seem to be far and away the most commonly utilized standard for measuring and holding compounders accountable for the quality process in their laboratories. And as was previously mentioned by Dr. Bassani, pharmaceutical ingredients are required by federal statute to come from FDA-registered and CGMP-inspected manufacturers. It is also a best practice stated in USP as well as in the educational courses that we provide that third-party analytical testing of compounds from FDA-registered laboratories should be conducted on an ongoing basis for compounding laboratories to continually validate and verify not just the compounding process but the compounding personnel and provide ongoing training for that. There's been a lot of questions about how we educate patients who come in to either fill a prescription or see their prescriber. Specific to the prescribing side of it, the language from USP 795 is commonly, again, either adopted by reference or adopted by copy and paste into various state boards of pharmacy. The Texas State Board of Pharmacy does exactly that. They do a virtual copy and paste. And so written material as well as patient counseling is a requirement for state boards of pharmacy on how we provide education to our patients. This is the language directly from the Texas Administrative Code related to this part, and this is specific for compounded medications. The way that most pharmacists get this, if we're talking about a patient who's receiving an estradiol that's been compounded or progesterone or testosterone that's been compounded, typically they're going to look at the FDA-approved written information. They're not going to create things from scratch. And so there are certain assumptions related to pharmacokinetics that we don't necessarily have the exact same data. There's no claim that these compounds are bioequivalent or generic to. That is not part of the discussion. But the written information on the potential benefits and risks typically mirrors in most of the components what is found in the written information related to FDA-approved products, which again is a requirement by law. Now there is a component about some of the bioidentical products, particularly creams, that we do have a concern about. We as pharmacists, we as medical professionals should all be concerned about, and that is the products that are available with quite literally no oversight. These are some products that you can go onto the internet. These are all from Amazon, and you just type in progesterone cream. You can type in estradiol cream, estriol bias creams, and all of these products just pop up, and you can buy them, get it as soon as tomorrow. And there's no medical oversight. There's no degree of patient counseling that occurs with this. A lot of these happen to be from one brand, but there's multiple brands that are all over the websites here. And that is a tremendous concern because all medications have risks. These are not benign products, and we need to make sure that what our patients are getting has been vetted thoroughly by their physician, whether it's their PCP or a specialist. And the way that the claims are made related to these products is extremely concerning. I won't read too much about it. You all have a copy of these slides, and you can read them at your leisure. This is the concern that I have related to the access and the availability of certain bioidentical products with no oversight. It's not anywhere on a patient's chart. There's no screening for drug interactions. There's no way to identify an adverse reaction when that patient appears to an emergency room or another point of care. Those are the concerns that I have. With all that being said, I'll stop now, hand things over, and of course we'll have time during our Q&A.